Hi everyone. So today we're going to be reviewing a video that I was sent. Thanks, by the way, for sending me things to review. Let's take a look. This is Dr. I think his name is Joel Fuhrman, vegan advocate. Um, let's see what he has to say.
The short-term studies may show some benefits, but now we finally have.
So I should say he's talking about, according to the title, are keto and carnivore diets healthy in the long run, right? So he's talking about long-term effects of ketogenic and carnivore diets.
Long-term studies, and to be a carnivore or keto advocate, you have to have some illogical rationalization as why you're going to disregard 100 long-term studies.
So I don't find anything like 100 of these. He's talking about hundreds of long-term studies. You can look here. I did a search, ketogenic diet long-term. He also said that he's looking for newer ones, right? So I looked also for ones after 2023. We could even look for ones after 2020. There's not a whole lot of them. Most of these are, some of them are mouse studies, which are actually interesting to look at for reasons I won't get into in this video. But most of them are, they're not particularly long term. So what he's talking about, I believe, is epidemiological data, which, as we've discussed in other videos, if you look at Western populations that eat meat tend to care less about their health. But if you look at, for example, China or Hong Kong or some of those other populations, you'll find that people who are eating more meat tend to have better outcomes, maybe because meat isn't demonized in the same way that it is in Western cultures.
Show danger. And they do. They throw them all out the window. They say, I was interviewed by and debated this guy, Saladino, who was one of the founders of the carnivore.
Yeah, so I saw that debate when it happened in, I don't know, 2018, 2019. It's been a little while. Actually, I think it was during the pandemic, 2020, 2021. He was referring to all the epidemiological stuff.
Carnivore diet, who said, all those studies don't matter because they're epidemiological studies, and it's just led to the people who are more wealthy or have television sets are going to be healthier.
So So the healthy user bias is a concept that's very well understood by anyone who's done any research at all on health and longevity and nutrition. What would be an example? So if I, for example, did a study on exercise and I was trying to prove that people who exercise more, live longer or whatever, could I leave out the fact that people who self-report, so you have to think about what's the methodology. Are you following people around and sort of tracking how many calories they're actually burning, quote unquote calories? That's another story. No, you're not. You're asking them to self-report exercise. So we know from many, many discussions of this topic that, for example, people who do manual labor, people who clean homes for a living, people who fix cars for a living, do not self-report as doing exercise, even though they're burning calories, right? Whereas people who self-report as doing exercise are people who are shopping at Whole Foods, people who are doing yoga classes, et cetera, et cetera. So it's just a different class of people that we're talking about. And if you discount that, there's no way to adjust for that. All of that data is going to be tainted by that bias, right?
And most of the people who are vegans or something like you just threw out all the studies. So I'm saying you can't throw out all the studies that corroborate each other from all parts of the world.
So you can throw out all those studies because we have other studies that I'm going to get into here. So when I did this Google Scholar search, right, I got a number of studies. This is one that I can point to. So the efficacy and safety of very low calorie ketogenic diets in patients with overweight and obesity, systematic review and meta-analysis. The present review, this was 2019. Okay, I'm sticking to stuff. I'm trying to stick to stuff. The last one I'll show is not very recent, but I'm trying to stick to stuff that's been done in the last few years, right? This one says, the present review supports the use of very low calorie ketogenic diets as an effective strategy for the management of overweight and obesity. Future guidelines should include a specific recommendation for this intervention. The next one, right? This one I thought was interesting because they're not hugely advocates of the ketogenic diet. In fact, when you read this in detail, you'll see that they're not advocates at all of the ketogenic diet. They don't like it, right? But even what they say, a ketogenic diet shows no more benefits, but also no less, on nutritional parameters than a balanced diet, and adverse effects of being on the diet are sometimes reported. I looked through the data. The adverse effects are not very clear to me. Things like muscle pain and so on are reported. That has to do with electrolyte imbalance, which, anyone who's used ketogenic diets therapeutically knows how to get people through those kind of issues. So, but even these guys who are pretty anti-keto, they're basically saying it seems to work as good as any other diet, right? So there's no danger here. What this guy is talking about is people ignoring evidence of danger. There's no evidence of that. Let's get to the next one, right? This is ketogenic diet for epilepsy and overview of systematic review and meta-analysis, right? Again, trying to stick to relatively recent stuff. This is 2022. Overall positive effects of the ketogenic diet, ketogenic diet therapy for epilepsy on seizure frequency reduction were observed. In contrast, the efforts on quality of life were more controversial. The present overview indicates that the ketogenic diet is safe. The most prevalent adverse effects were gastrointestinal, weight loss, metabolic disorders, while the most common reasons for discontinuance were the lack of observed efficacy and dietary intolerance. Okay? And by the way, the numbers of people who reported that in this study are not very high. Okay, let's look at the next one. Very low calorie ketogenic diet, safe and valuable tool for long-term glycemic management in patients with obesity and type 2 diabetes, right? Well, this is not a very big study, but 30 patients, right? The study confirmed as a valuable effect of very low carbohydrate ketogenic diet in the long-term management of obesity and type 2 diabetes. Let's look at the next one I could find. Again, it's looking at exactly what he said, long-term data, trying to get long-term. That last one wasn't very long-term, but let's see if we can get longer term. Ketogenic diet for cancer, right? What this one is looking at specifically those who follow the ketogenic diet for more than 12 months. They had a much higher chance of surviving. So 10 out of 21 of the people who followed the diet for more than 12 months, 10 out of 21 passed away, unfortunately. So 10 out of 21 died. 31 out of 32 in the less than 12 months died, right, during this follow-up, right? The results indicate that a longer continuation of the ketogenic diet improved the prognosis of advanced cancer patients. And then last one, this is in some ways the most thorough, but we have this paper. Unfortunately, it's not that recent. So this is 2009. That's why I didn't put it towards the beginning. But it's really fascinating because it's looking at the short-term stuff. It's looking at the animal models, the human models, and then eventually it's going to get to the long-term benefits, right? And when we get to the long-term stuff, there's actually quite a lot of data on the long-term benefits of ketogenic diets. And then it's looking at actual data sets, right? So let's just look at the longer data sets. So 6 to 12 years. We have 600 children who've been followed up in Hopkins. So they remained on the ketogenic diet because of dramatic seizure reduction. Even after these extended periods, all children maintained large urinary ketosis and control was stable, with only periodic breakthrough seizures. Of the 28 children, 24 were reported as having greater than 90% seizure reduction. That's a pretty huge, it's not, 600 kids is not a small amount. 28 children who stick to it, 24 who are using it to get 90% plus seizure reduction. Remember, these are often treatment-resistant patients with epilepsy. This is some pretty serious stuff. So if you're using it to help improve their quality of life, to help improve outcomes, that's great. There's also this case study of a 29-year-old man with tuberous sclerosis complex. Started a ketogenic diet at 6 years of age, been on it for 23 years. He still takes 3-to-1 ketogenic, so that's 3 parts fat to 1 part protein, with large ketosis, 90% seizure reduction, and approximately 1 to 2 seizures per year, right? His parents still provide him his diet, which he brings daily to work, and he doesn't appear to have tolerance issues. Yeah, I've tried to fact check what he's saying, and I can't find anything. By the way, I did find something. Maybe I'll bring that study up too. So this is a study. The reason I'm sharing this is because it is explicitly by the vegans, right? You look at the lead author of Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, right? This guy, Neil Barnard, many of you will know as another YouTube doctor in the same crew as Fuhrman, who advocates high carbohydrate, low fat diets, right? Vegan diets specifically. And even this, which is trying to look at all of the data, if we go straight to their conclusion here. So obviously they're doing everything they can to completely, quote unquote, debunk this, right? They have to admit that ketogenic diets reduce seizure frequency in some individuals. They reduce body weight. They claim not more effectively. That's debatable. LDL-C can rise, which we don't care about. We care about outcomes, right? Which is cardiovascular disease, cancer, etc. By the way, in most people, LDL-C doesn't rise. If you start a ketogenic diet and you happen to be overweight, chances are that your LDL-C will actually go down. And this is data from Sotomoto and others, Nick Norowitz and that crew. And then this is all just bias, right? So they eat foods that are linked to an increase of CKD, chronic kidney disease, cardiovascular disease, cancer. And so linked to is the important thing here. There's no mechanism whereby these things supposedly do that. There are hypothetical mechanisms in some cases, But for example, meat and cancer, I mean, that's just nonsense. Meat and diabetes, even more nonsense, right? Whereas fruits and diabetes, now we're talking causation, right? There are mechanisms in fruit sugar, fructose, but also just in sugar in general, that can promote or worsen diabetes, right? So I'm citing this one, even though it's, by the physicians committee, it's clearly vegan propaganda. I'm citing this one because even the vegans couldn't really take on this diet with any hard results. There's nothing there. There's nothing here. You can read the whole paper. You can look at all the citations. There's nothing here that would indicate that the ketogenic diet is dangerous at all.
Well, now we have really incredibly effective, appropriate, and intellectually done research.
So we don't. I mean, I've just given some of the actual research that exists. Whatever he's talking about, it doesn't indicate any dangers to diets that are high in meat and high in fat. Nothing. There's nothing in the literature at all
showing long-term following these people on these keto diets and heavy protein diets for 20 years, 30 years, showing how dangerous they are.
So again, I think he's talking about sort of things like NHANES follow-up and those big data sets, which are basically just magnifying the healthy user bias. That's all they're really doing. They cannot conclude. In order to make a conclusion about a particular diet, you have to actually study the diet, right? You have to know that the people, for example, are getting into nutritional ketosis. Ideally, you're providing them food. Ideally, you're in a metabolic ward. And doing that kind of study long term, like how much would someone have to pay you to live for like 2 years in a metabolic ward? Like they probably couldn't pay you enough. They probably couldn't pay me enough to do it, right? In that kind of context, the data sets we have are always going to be incomplete. And so what bothers me about what he's saying is that if anything, the data is the other way right now. What I'm reading, if you look at some of the data that's coming out comparing short-term trials, these have to be short-term because someone could probably convince me to live in a metabolic ward for a couple of weeks. They couldn't convince me to do it for a couple of months, right? Or even a couple of years, right? So the short-term data is showing that high-fat diets are actually more effective and they work more quickly for reversing some of the serious problems with metabolic disease for a lot of people. I'm not saying it works 100% of the time, but the data shows pretty clearly that high-fat, low-carb diets seem to be more effective than just cutting calories for a number of things. But that's the topic of another video. Let me know what you thought about Dr. Fuhrman down below. I'll see you in the next one.